The diplomatic relations between China and Japan have reached a critical point, with China escalating a dispute over Taiwan to the United Nations. This confrontation follows remarks made by Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, which China perceives as an alarming shift in Japan's military stance. Takaichi stated that any attack on Taiwan would be a survival-threatening situation for Japan, thereby justifying the activation of Japan's self-defense forces. These comments have drawn a strong reaction from Beijing, which views them as a direct violation of international law and diplomatic norms. China's ambassador to the United Nations, Fu Kong, has condemned the Japanese Prime Minister's statements, calling them erroneous and extremely dangerous. Fu raised concerns that Japan's actions could have far-reaching consequences, signaling a departure from the country's long-standing pacifist policies. In his address, Fu emphasized that Japan's statements marked an unprecedented shift in its foreign policy, pointing out that it was the first time since the end of World War II that a Japanese leader had linked Taiwan's defense to Japan's own national security. By suggesting that any threat to Taiwan would trigger Japan's involvement, Takaichi's remarks indicated a willingness to intervene militarily, a stance that Beijing finds unacceptable. Fu further stressed that Japan had now crossed a red line by signaling its intention to potentially send troops overseas, a move that directly challenges the spirit of Japan's post-war constitution. Japan's constitution, adopted in 1947, strictly limits the use of military force and prohibits Japan from deploying its military abroad for combat. This pacifist stance has been a cornerstone of Japan's post-war identity. The self-defense forces were created with the understanding that they would only be used for non-combat purposes within Japan's territory or for immediate self-defense. Over the decades, this restrictive interpretation of Japan's military role remained largely intact, but there have been significant changes, particularly in the past few decades, driven by shifting geopolitical realities. The most notable shift came in 2015, when Japan's government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, passed a set of security laws that allowed for collective self-defense. This change enabled Japan to send its forces overseas in support of allies, but only in the event that Japan's own survival was at stake. This controversial shift has led to intense debate within Japan, with some advocating for a more robust military role, while others fear it could drag the country into foreign conflicts, undermining the very principles of pacifism that Japan's constitution was designed to uphold. Against this backdrop, the current crisis has brought Japan's military policy into the international spotlight. China is particularly concerned by the prospect of Japan playing an active military role in the region, especially in Taiwan, where tensions with China have been escalating for years. Taiwan is a democratic island that China considers a breakaway province, and Beijing has repeatedly stated its intentions to reunite Taiwan with the mainland by force if necessary. Japan's comments have raised alarms in Beijing, as they suggest that Japan may be preparing to intervene in the event of a conflict over Taiwan. For China, this represents a direct challenge to its sovereignty and an unacceptable interference in its internal affairs. Fu Kong's remarks underline China's position that any attempt by Japan to intervene militarily would be met with a forceful response. He reiterated that China would exercise its right to self-defense under the United Nations Charter and international law, signaling that Beijing is prepared to take whatever measures it deems necessary to protect its territorial integrity. The diplomatic fallout from this exchange is not limited to just words. The economic and cultural ties between Japan and China, two of Asia's largest economies, have already started to feel the strain. Bilateral relations between the two countries have been fraught with tension for decades, particularly due to unresolved issues related to World War II. However, this latest diplomatic crisis has pushed their relationship to a new low, with trade and tourism taking a direct hit. In 2024, Japan's exports to China were valued at approximately $120 billion, making China one of Japan's largest trading partners. However, since the recent escalation, China has suspended several imports from Japan, including seafood, a major sector of bilateral trade. The suspension of these imports has already had significant economic repercussions for Japan's businesses, especially those in the food and agricultural sectors. The Japanese economy, already grappling with its own set of challenges, now faces the added pressure of deteriorating trade relations with one of its largest partners. China's economic retaliation has not stopped at trade. The country has also issued a travel advisory urging its citizens to avoid travelling to Japan, which has had a noticeable impact on tourism. Estimates suggest that around 30% of the planned 1.4 million trips to Japan through the end of the year have been cancelled, reflecting the growing unease among Chinese citizens. For Japan, tourism from China is a vital part of its economy, and a significant drop in Chinese visitors will have a lasting impact on the country's hospitality industry. In addition to tourism, cultural exchanges between the two countries have also been disrupted. China has suspended streaming of Japanese films and television shows, further straining the cultural ties between the two nations. Educational exchange programs have also been affected, with several programs being put on hold or cancelled altogether. A recent example of this is a Hong Kong student delegation, which announced its withdrawal from an exchange program with Japan, citing the rising tensions between the two countries. These disruptions in trade, tourism and cultural exchange are a reflection of the broader geopolitical rift between China and Japan. The tensions have already begun to ripple through the region, with other countries in East Asia closely watching the developments. Japan's position on Taiwan is particularly sensitive, as it could set a precedent for other countries in the region. Countries like South Korea, the United States, and even members of the European Union are closely monitoring the situation, as any shift in Japan's military policy could have significant ramifications for regional security. Japan's government, for its part, has yet to respond publicly to China's formal complaint at the United Nations. It remains to be seen how Japan will navigate this increasingly complex diplomatic crisis. On one hand, Japan faces the challenge of balancing its security concerns in a rapidly changing regional environment, particularly with China's growing assertiveness. On the other hand, Japan must carefully consider the long-term implications of shifting away from its pacifist stance, especially in the face of mounting domestic and international criticism. As the crisis continues to unfold, both Japan and China will need to carefully manage their diplomatic, economic and military strategies. For now, the immediate fallout from this dispute is likely to be felt most acutely in the economic sphere, with trade relations already taking a significant hit. However, the long-term consequences of this confrontation could be even more profound, potentially reshaping the security dynamics of East Asia for years to come. At the heart of this dispute lies Taiwan, a democratically governed island that China views as a breakaway province, while Japan considers its security interests to be intertwined with Taiwan's stability. The future of Taiwan is one of the most critical issues in East Asia today, and the actions of countries like Japan and China will have far-reaching implications for the region's peace and stability. For now, the world watches closely as Japan and China navigate this perilous diplomatic crisis. As both nations weigh their options, the question remains: how will this dispute shape the future of East Asia, and what role will Japan play in the region's evolving security architecture?